Can a real estate agent or service really say their services are free when they're getting paid? Join us. Okay, disclaimer. Have to say it. If a realtor tells you their services are free or at no charge to you, run. It doesn't matter what shoes you got on, run and run as fast as you can whilst never looking back. Although we have proposed settlement agreements between the National Association of Realtors and the Department of Justice, they're at an impasse. Changes have been made to get everybody on the agree page with the Department of Justice, and they affect the multiple listing service as well as the code of ethics that realtors have to follow. Now, the Department of Justice issues that they brought to the National Association of Realtors affects all real estate license holders, whether they're members of National Association of Realtors or not. The National Association of Realtors is the big group, and the other ones are smaller and less independent. So they're going to have to really work to know what's going on. But we have seen this impasse between the Department of Justice or the DOJ and the NAR, National Association of Realtors. So certain rules came into play as of the first quarter of 2021. And we're going to talk about that today. And the biggest thing that we all need to realize and pay attention to is there ain't no free lunch, right, Carrie?
Oh, I wish there was a free lunch, but there's not. There's no
I
free lunch.
know. And we really have to know and we have to understand that there are certain things that the Department of Justice and those negotiations that have been going forward with NAR have mandated. And one of the things that all real estate agents should know and realtors should know in particular has to do with, sorry, multiple listing servers or MLS. So the National Association of Realtors puts out all these MLS policies that every MLS across the nation has to subscribe to. So they can put in their own rules, but some rules they have to oblige to honor regardless. And some of those rules that really came into play out of the DOJ and NAR talks were that can know at no point should they or can they advertise their services are free or at no cost to their client. That comes right out of the NAR MLS policy statements. And the only way that they truly can say that their services are free is if they have no financial compensation in any way, shape, fashion, or form. They receive nothing. And I don't think there's any real estate agent out there that gets nothing for the work that they do. And so we have to be very careful. And this thought process came into play many years ago where you would see buyer's agents advertise or tell buyers that it's at no cost to you and that it's actually free. And that's not actually the case. And that thought process comes down to the fact that the listing side or the seller was paying for the buyer's agent commission. And if you follow the money, it really could turn out to be that the buyers with their funds, if you do some kind of forensic accounting, it's their funds that kind of kick it all off. So that's a different way to think about it. And whether you subscribe to the fact that the buyers pay for the real estate commissions or whether the seller pays for the real estate commissions, doesn't matter. We can't say free. And if you have an agent that is telling you that their services are free, you need to run. Turn them in, but run, right?
Yeah, because it's not free. And I'm glad you mentioned the MLS rules that have been updated. The Realtor Code of Ethics has also been updated. So that's the code of ethics that everyone who's a member of the National Association of Realtors has agreed to follow by their membership there. And it now reads, realtors must not represent that their brokerage services to a client or a customer are free or available at no cost to their clients unless the realtor will receive no financial compensation from any source for those services. If a realtor is legitimately like working without any compensation coming to them from anyone involved anywhere, then of course, yeah, they can say it's for free. But if someone is compensating that person, then they're not allowed to say my services are free.
And I think you're at an advantage, Carrie, because you've actually read the code of ethics. And I think that's something that consumers really need to ask their real estate professional when they're hiring a realtor. Have you read your own code of ethics? Do you know what it means? And really having a discussion with them, because a lot of agents have never even taken the time to invest to read what they're subscribing to, which is really unfortunate because these are the rules that make it an even play.
Right. Yeah. I love the fact that NAR has a code of ethics that we all agree to follow. Like, how cool to be part of a professional organization that like has an explicit code of ethics, a standard to which we all need to subscribe in our behavior. So
Yeah, because the real estate agents, realtors, excuse me, let me say it correctly, have certain duties and responsibilities to the public and to their clients that if they have never read the code of ethics, they aren't going to know that they're supposed to do, or they're going to try and remember from their education, which isn't going to be possible. But really understanding that code is going to be imminent success is going to come from knowing what's in it for both the client and the realtor.
yeah, very true. So let's talk a little bit more about what a realtor is required to disclose to you about their compensation. So they need
Good.
to, yeah, they need to disclose how they're compensated. And they also need to disclose any company policies regarding amounts of their compensation. So they're going to disclose the amount of compensation to be paid by the client. And they'll also disclose the potential for any additional or offsetting compensation from other brokers, from the seller or the landlord, or even from other parties in the transaction. So essentially, any money that is coming to your realtor, like as a result of their work that they're doing for you, they should be disclosing and should be completely transparent with you, how much and where it's coming from.
Absolutely. Actually, even in January, there was an update that had to come out about our MLS and the listings that are being shown on every site out there, whether it's your real estate agents or company site or Zillow or anywhere else that you're going to go looking. It's going to say buyer representative or buyer agent compensation, and it's going to have to disclose that for total transparency.
And that's important to know because a lot of times there's an agreement between the real estate agent and their client as to how much they will get compensated in the end. And for a lot of properties, the seller's offering to cover that full compensation, but there are some properties that the consumer may be looking at where the seller's not offering that full amount. And that means that the rest of the amount may have to come out of their pocket. And so it's really, really important to be transparent and keep people updated that if they do choose to go for this specific property, they may need to pay some of the compensation out of their pocket, which is something that they may or may not have been expecting. So really important point of transparency for people to know exactly how much money they need to bring to the closing table and for what.
Right. So the code of ethics change that went into effect, there's 2 points you laid there. Can you say them one more time just so that we get them crystal clear?
Yeah. So we need to disclose the amount of compensation to be paid by the client and disclose the potential for additional or offsetting compensation from other brokers, from the seller, the landlord, or from other parties.
Wow. Yeah. And that's all about being transparent and really everybody knowing, and it can't be hidden there. And the amount of compensation to be paid by the client, because you could agree to be paid X, but the listing that you're looking at only pays Y. And then are you going to be charged the difference? What's going to come into play there? Yeah. It's very important to know that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's important to know how much money you need to bring in.
Yeah.
In every transaction, there are two sides to the total compensation, and each side has a different set of responsibilities that contribute to the amount that is being charged and being received.
Yeah, you're right there because when it comes in, and we've seen a lot of lawsuits come into play because the sellers have thought that there's no kind of negotiation really on what they're paying. And as far as commission, and everything in this world is basically negotiable, but we've got to make sure that our buyers agents are covered in what the listing company is collecting on that commission. because we really have to remember that in most marketplaces and in most price ranges, the buyers don't have the extra cash to pay at closing for the brokerage compensation. And since lenders don't allow them to add that into the purchase price or include it in to any kind of financing, it's got to be paid somewhere. And it's really comes out of the seller at closing. And it's super crucial that we understand that buyers, agents need to be compensated and buyers should be entitled to great representation, just as a seller and a listing agent would be. Because at the end of the game, at the very bottom line, compensation is paid through our compensation agreements. So before a listing ever hits the market, a listing agreement is created where the seller and the listing company agree on what the compensation is going to be. And on the buyer side, a buyer's agent and the buyer's brokerage is going to come to terms with a buyer on how much they're going to charge for their services. Most of the time, when those line up, then everything works great. But if they don't, then we've got to know whether the buyer's going to have to offset that commission or the seller's going to. We also see sometimes when sellers are offering a bonus to a buyer's agent if they get a deal by a certain time, or all different types of creative marketing that the seller is putting into play to try and get their deals done. But at the end of the day, I think everybody, and you've really talked about that disclosure of that compensation, everybody needs to understand that the listing brokerage compensation plus the buyer's agent compensation equals the total commission. And I don't think a lot of people get that. And there's a lot of different aspects. If you think about our veterans, and the Veterans Administration says that a veteran cannot pay any money towards their buyer's representation. And if they're buying a property and can't pay their, representative, it's got to be paid from somewhere. And until a lot of those things changes, it's harsh for a seller to say, "Oh, we're not going to pay for the buyer's rep," kind of situation. But all of those things happen in those negotiations. But the most important thing is what we led off with, which is saying it's free, or my love don't cost a thing. Creative ways. And when it comes down to it, it's the real estate industry as a whole. It's not just realtors. It's just not members of the National Association of Realtors. The Department of Justice came after the real estate industry, right? This goes into property management. This goes into apartment locators. This goes into your real estate agent who doesn't subscribe to the code of ethics, right? Because we're all faced with the same burden of transparency and disclosure.
Transparency is so important, especially in purchases that are so significant and so important to people. And usually for such a large amount of money, it's so important to have that transparency and have everyone really have a good understanding of where the money's going and what's required of them.
Right. Because if you aren't honest and aren't truthful, it leads people to think, "Oh, I'm doing it for free." You ain't doing nothing for free. And if you see somebody who says it's for free, run. Because if they don't know the rules in their own industry, it's probably not somebody who's going to represent your best interests. Would you agree with that?
I would totally agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Ask them how much is if they're afraid to tell you or to negotiate their commission with you, they gonna be afraid to negotiate for your bottom line and the price you're paying or the price you're accepting. Be very careful there. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
But remember, commissions, like everything else, are,
Negotiable.
yeah, each party needs to be good at negotiating. Yeah. Negotiations 101. Can't fight for myself, can't fight for you. Have a great one.